Last video I released on this channel was a blind test between the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera and the 4K. But this time I thought we would go a little bit more in depth with these cameras. From here on out I will refer to the cameras as the original and the 4K, because saying Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K over and over again gets quite annoying in the long run. The original was released in 2013 and the 4K in 2018, so there is a 5-year age difference, but I still think it's fair to compare the cameras. They are brothers after all. The 4K obviously shoots in 4K, but the original is limited to 1080p. But how big of an impact does this really have on the final image? So to determine the image quality, I thought we would look at the blind test that I released in my last video, but this time it won't be blind. For the tests, both cameras were fed the same amount of light using the same aperture. The cameras were then matched in the grade in terms of white balance, tint, contrast and exposure. Both cameras were shooting in RAW, and on the original that means Cinema GNG, and on the 4K that was B-RAW 5:1 and 8:1. And of course both cameras were shooting in log, which is Blackmagic's design film. I'll let you draw your own conclusions in terms of image quality, but for me, one dead giveaway for the original is that moire. You can see it very clearly in my shirt in this shot. If you want to shoot in higher frame rates to get slow motion, then there's a clear winner here. The 4K can shoot up to 60 FPS in 4K DCI and UHD. If you shoot in 2.4:1, you can go up to 75 frames per second. If you want to go even higher than that, you can go up all the way to 120 frames per second in 2.8K. On the original, on the other hand, you're limited to 1080p at 30 FPS max. In terms of image quality, the 5-year age difference might not show that much. The original still punches way above its weight. But when it comes to functionality and ease of use, I think the 4K is a clear winner here. To change white balance, ISO or shutter on the original, you have to go all the way into the menus. There is no false color, there's no support for LUTs, there's basically not many extra features other than the awesome image quality. The 4K, however, has a large 5-inch touchscreen on the back of the camera, on which you can control everything. On top of that, you have buttons, quite a few of them, and also custom function buttons, which you can map to functions of your choice. You can load your own LUTs into the camera, as well as having false color already installed in the camera. You can choose what to output to the LCD on the back of the camera, as well as what to output to the HDMI, and you can control these independently of each other. And on top of that, you have Bluetooth for remote control of the camera. Some apps are pretty simple, which will only let you basically stop, start, record, and some others will let you control basically everything on the camera. So if you're working on an actual working set, I would choose the 4K hands down. I'm not going to tell you which camera is better or at what ISOs the noise levels are acceptable. I'll leave that up to you. So let's look at some tests, but keep in mind that the 4K has a dual native ISO, so we'll switch from the low gain to the high gain between ISO 1000 and 1250. And in this test I've actually matched the original's ISO 800 to the 4K's ISO 400, and that's because they give the same exposure. If I dial in every setting to be exactly the same on both cameras, including aperture, shutter and so on, except I'll leave the original on ISO 800 and the 4K on ISO 400, I'll get the same exposure. And if you've seen my video comparing the GH5 and the original Pocket, it was the same thing there as well. So the original Pocket's ISO 800 is actually ISO 400, at least on my unit. So let's dive in and look at the test. Both cameras shoot in both ProRes and RAW. And for ProRes, that is all the flavors between Proxy and 42HQ. The RAW, however, is different between the two cameras. The original shoots in lossless Cinema DNG RAW. It is compressed, but it is a lossless compression. The 4K shoots in the newer Blackmagic RAW, also known as B-RAW. It can shoot in resolutions up to 4K DCI, while the original is limited to 1080p. When you're shooting in ProRes, you're shooting in 10-bit color, and when you're using RAW, you're actually going up all the way to 12 bits. What about autofocus? And for these two cameras, it's the same story. Nothing to write home about. They do technically have autofocus, but it's a one-time push autofocus. You push a button and it will focus in the center of the screen. It's nothing continuous and it's nothing that you should be using while rolling. So for both cameras, manual all the way. And I don't mind. None of the cameras have in-body image stabilization, also known as IBIS. So if you want stabilization within the camera, you're gonna have to look into lenses with stabilization. So if you're using lenses without stabilization, such as cinema lenses or vintage lenses, and you want a pleasing handheld look, you're gonna want to add some weight to the camera by rigging it up a bit. And that's even more important for the original, since it's even smaller and more lightweight. Because just using the small lightweight body with a lens will give you quite ugly micro jitters. When it comes to internal batteries, the 4K uses Canon LPE6 batteries, while the original uses Nikon EN EL20 batteries. Both have pretty poor battery life, but I would give the edge to the 4K. I would say you could get maybe up to 40, at least 30 minutes on one battery, while on the original, I don't think you'll get up to 40 minutes, to be honest. So if you're gonna use either camera in a production or studio environment, you probably want some kind of external power source. That could be mains power or a V-lock battery. Both cameras have ports for external power, so you won't be needing any dummy batteries. One thing though is when using external power on the original, you won't see the voltages delivered from the external source. On the 4K, however, you will see the voltages, so you know when your V-mount is running low. The 4K has both 3.5mm mic in, as well as a mini XLR with phantom power. The original only has a 3.5mm mic input. Both cameras do, however, have a 3.5mm headphone out. On the 4K you can record two channels at the same time, and you can really mix and match the inputs. You can have one channel to be the XLR input, while the other is the internal microphone, or the XLR with phantom power and let's say a lav mic plugged into the 3.5mm mic input. Well, let's do a quick audio test so you can hear the difference for yourself. Keep in mind I will be using the same microphone and position for both, so I won't be using the XLR input on the 4K, but the 3.5mm input to match the original. This is an audio test using a Rode Video Micro on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. This is an audio test using a Rode Video Micro on the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera. This is an audio test using a Rode Video Micro on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. This is an audio test using a Rode Video Micro on the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera. One thing I have noticed on the 4K though is that even at 100% gain, the volume is quite low. When compared to the GH5 I used before, I had to bring the volume down, and here I'm pushing all the way up to 100%, but it's still not quite as strong. I don't have an XLR mic, so I can't test if it's the same case with the XLR input, but from what I've read online, it seems to be the case. Both cameras use a Micro Four Thirds mount, but the sensors behind that mount are slightly different. The 4K uses a Micro Four Thirds sensor, or slightly bigger. It's 1.9x compared to the traditional 2x for Micro Four Thirds. The original, however, uses more of a Super 16mm sensor, which has a crop factor of around 2.88x. I use both cameras with speed boosters, however, 0.71x speed boosters. So effectively that gives the original an MFT sensor and the 4K a slightly bigger than Super 35 sensor. It's roughly 1.35x compared to 1.5 for traditional Super 35mm sensors. In practice, this simply means that if you have a set of, let's say, a 24, 35, 50 and 85mm lenses, you will be using one step wider on the original compared to the 4K. So to match the framing of a 35 on the 4K, you'll use a 24 on the original, and that will give you roughly the same frame size. The use of a wider focal length will however give you a slightly deeper depth of field on the original compared to the 4K. And since a 24mm lens isn't really wide on the original, you might need to get even wider lenses to get a wide on the original. But what about media? The 4K can record to SD cards, CFast cards, as well as external SSDs using the USB-C port on the camera. The original can only use SD cards. And if you want to shoot RAW, the camera can be quite picky about what cards you can and can't use. The card that Blackmagic recommends for shooting RAW on the camera is SanDisk Extreme Pro 95 MB per second. But those aren't the newer V30 rated versions of those cards, it's the older discontinued versions. So to get your hands on those you probably have to buy them used. But I have seen some people report success with other cards, such as the Kingston Cavens React. I haven't had any experience with those cards myself, so I can't guarantee anything, but I've seen a lot of people in the comment sections of some of my videos report success with those cards. As I said when we were talking audio, both cameras have 3.5mm mic in and headphone out. The 4K has a XLR, a mini XLR input on top of that as well. Both cameras have HDMI inputs. The original has a micro HDMI, while the 4K has a full-sized HDMI. And if you want to compare micro HDMI versus full-sized HDMI, well, full-sized is a sturdier connection. Both cameras have ports for external power. They do use different connections though, and the 4K version is a locking mount, so it won't disconnect if you pull the plug. The original has a port for a remote, while the 4K uses Bluetooth for remote control. On the 4K you have a USB-C port as well, which you can use to plug in external SSDs and record straight onto. You can also use it for run-stop recording and so on. What about some closing remarks? As you've seen in the blind test, and as I've also noticed in the comment section of the blind test video, the image quality is very close between the two cameras, and you can match them up pretty well, so using them for A and B cam could be quite interesting. So if you need a 4K instead of the original, it comes down more to usability, features, and in what situations you will actually use the camera. Are you going to use the camera for YouTube videos, travel videos, or solo missions? Or are you going to use it on a working paid set? That is a question that only you can answer, but if you still own a original, it can still hang with its bigger brother. And that pretty much wraps it up for this video. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see some more, and I'll see you next time.